Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Madeline Fitzgerald, and I am the manager of adult programs here at the Amon Carter Museum of American Art. Thank you all for joining us today to hear from artists whose work can be found in the exhibition Emancipation, the Unfinished Project of Liberation, which is on view through July 9th. On behalf of the museum, I would especially like to welcome and thank our members who are in the audience this afternoon. It is because of your generosity that our collection and special exhibitions are free and open to everyone. If you are not currently a member, I, of course, want to encourage you to join today by visiting the museum shop this afternoon or by going to our website at cartermuseum.org/join. We want to especially thank our supporters for helping make the Emancipation exhibition possible. We'd like to acknowledge that the funding for the artist installations is made possible by Sasha and Edward P. Bass. The Carter's presentation of Emancipation is supported by the Leo Potishman Foundation and the Alice L. Walton Foundation Temporary Exhibitions Endowment. Additionally, I would like to thank the staff at Hired Hands for providing American Sign Language interpretation for today's talks. Thank you. Yes. As a reminder, if you haven't already, please take this time to silence your cell phones and any other electronic devices that you may have with you today. The Emancipation exhibition is accompanied by a publication from the University of California Press. You can see it on our coffee table right over here. It features interviews with the 7 contemporary artists in the exhibition. The catalog explores their practices along with cutting-edge scholarship by Kirsten Pye Buck and Kelvin Parnell, among others, as well as a haunting story of embodiment and exploitation by the celebrated science fiction author N.K. Jemisin. The book is available for purchase in the museum shop after today's talk, and our artists who are speaking today will happily sign your book for a brief minute after the talk today, if you're interested. So our plan for this afternoon is we'll begin today's talks with a brief introduction of the exhibition by Maggie Adler, the Carter's curator of paintings, sculpture, and works on paper, and the co-curator of the exhibition with Marita Poole, the executive director of the Newcomb Art Museum. Following Maggie's introduction of the exhibition, she'll introduce our first 2 speakers, Maya Freelon and Jeffrey Meris. After their presentations, we'll take a few moments for audience Q&A, and then we'll welcome Maggie Adler back on stage as a moderator of the conversation between Letitia Huckaby and director of the Netflix documentary Descendant, Margaret Brown. We'll follow their conversation with an audience Q&A for all of the Q&A sessions. I'll come around with a microphone, which will allow for your questions to be heard in the recording of this talk. We'll be uploading a recording of today's talks on the Carter's YouTube channel in the coming weeks. And now I would like to invite Maggie Adler to share more information about the exhibition and introduce the artist speaking today.
Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to see all of you here. And I just think this is one of the most important exhibitions that the Carter has put on, not because I did it, but just because I believe that. And I really do owe a huge debt of gratitude to my co-curator, Marita Poole, who can't be with us here today, and my original thought partner, Horace Ballard, who is now at the Harvard Art Museum. So they're here with us in spirit. And I consider this exhibition actually my role to be that of a conductor. And I really want to foreground the voices of our other scholars and our artists, and I'm just here to make the connections and make sure that this all happened without saying too much. And I hope you come see the show. It's upstairs, it's open and free to the public until July 9th, and then it will subsequently travel to Tulane University with Marita, to the Williams College Museum of Art in Massachusetts, and then to the Telfair Museum. So tell all your friends in those locations. So it started with this sculpture. This is John Quincy Adams Ward's The Freedman from 1863. a very interesting and singular work in that it was completed before the outcome of the Civil War was certain. And it's probably the second bronze in the United States to depict a Black person, as well as really the only example that I know of where the person depicted has freed himself. So the emancipation has been enacted by the strength of his own will. Our copy is unique in this particular way in that it has a key that unlocks the shackle. And the shackle is inscribed to the Massachusetts 54th, the all-Black regiment that you might be familiar with from the movie Glory, among other things. And Ward himself was an abolitionist. He intended it to express not one set free by proclamation, but by his own love of freedom and a conscious power to break things. And the idea was to create an aspirational sculpture. Well, what seems aspirational in the 19th century, I don't have to tell you, in the 21st century takes on a different valence. And on our 60th anniversary at the Carter, we invited staff members who were not curators to comment on a work of art of their choosing. And you may all know Alfred Walker, our head of facilities for 42 years here at the Amon Carter. And he chose the Freedman, and he said, but Maggie, the shackles are still there. And I said, you're right, Alfred, I'm going to do a show. And so that was the inspiration for inviting Horace to join me, and subsequently Marita, to work on this. And I'm not in a position, so we contextualized the work with precedents, artistic precedents of the time, and models from which Ward diverged significantly, including the very controversial Thomas Ball Memorial that is the subject of another exhibition about emancipation currently. Part of the research for this project uncovered the original owner of this work, is Zelma Watson George, who was the first woman and Black woman to receive a PhD in music from the University of Chicago. She was a member of the Eisenhower administration. She was a delegate to the UN. She was a civil rights activist who knew Langston Hughes, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Zora Neale Hurston, and invited them frequently to her home, where it's said she had the sculpture on her piano. So every time she played music, people were there to witness the sculpture. And it, for me, takes on a different valence when you think about Zelma Watson George being the holder of the key. So we invited 7 artists, 3 of whom are here with us today: Maya Freelon, Jeffrey Meris, and Letitia Huckaby, Fort Worth's own Letitia Huckaby. We invited 7 artists whose work really deals with issues of liberation, incarceration, emancipation, or lack thereof. And I really, Horace and I really wanted to invite artists who were early to mid-career, who had a sense of installation or sculpture, since the sort of beginning point of the exhibition was related to sculpture. And I'm going to just briefly go through the artists who are not here today to speak, and then I will obviously have Maya and Jeffrey speak, and Letitia speak to their own work. So this is Sadie Barnett. Her work is connected to her father's involvement in the Black Panther Party. They are astonishing graphite drawings about the history of surveillance of her father, who is still alive today, to tell a story. They are massive graphite drawings. I keep repeating this because you're not going to believe that they're drawings. And they're designed to haunt the ghost of J. Edgar Hoover by including Hello Kitty, hearts, glitter, graffiti aesthetic. And if you've seen the pink signs all over town, the reason for the pink was inspired by Sadie's use of pink glitter paint in the galleries. Sable Elise Smith comments on the inequities of the incarceration system, and so her work is here, juxtaposed with Maya's work. It is a jack that is composed of the types of stools that you would sit on for a prison visit, thereby making them totally ineffectual. Alfred Conte is a friend of Marita's, a Atlanta-based artist who investigates his experience in Atlanta through sculpture and through large-scale portraiture. And his contributions to the exhibition are twofold: the sculpture Float, which is on loan to us from Clark Atlanta University, the HBCU, where Marita was formerly the director, and a painting called A Charge to Keep that is the result of his asking his people in his neighborhood, particularly at his barbershop, what are the things you most fear? And this gentleman answered, I fear how I'm going to feed and protect my family. Hugh Hayden took the prompt most literally. He spent a lot of time investigating John Quincy Adams Ward's sculpture, and he said, when is it going to be time for this sculpture to rest? And so what he had us do is engage a company called Envision, which is located here in the DFW region, to do a super high resolution scan of our sculpture down to the breadth of a human hair. And the result is his own 3D printed version where the stump on which the freedman, I can't say rests, plants himself, has turned into an Adirondack chair, and his clothing has turned into a backyard afternoon of Columbia fishing shirt, cargo shorts, and flip-flops. And it's amazing how the same figure takes on a different emotional nuance when dressed in contemporary dress. And that is my quick run through of the exhibition. And so I'm going to introduce to you our first speaker, is Maya Freelon, coming to us from North Carolina. Thank you, Maya, for making the trip. Maya is an award-winning visual artist whose work was described by her godmother, the late poet Maya Angelou, as, quote, visualizing the truth about the vulnerability and power of the human being. Her artwork was featured on the cover of Walter magazine, Garden and Gun magazine, highlighting the new book Southern Women, and most recently, Lux Interiors and Design. She was commissioned by Google to design original art for their on-hub router, by Cadillac to create a live sculpture for their Dare Greatly creative campaign, by the North Carolina Museum of Art to create a collaborative tissue paper sculpture celebrating the opening of their African Art Wing, and by Halcyon to create a monumental sculpture for the first annual By the People Festival at the Smithsonian Arts and Industries Building. You never get to rest, do you? Her work, praised by the International Review of African American Art as a vibrant, beating assemblage of color, has been exhibited internationally, including shows in Paris, Jamaica, Madagascar, and Italy. Maya has completed residencies at the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in Maine, as has Jeffrey, the Karabati Institute in Ghana, and the Brandywine Workshop in Philadelphia. She earned a BA from Lafayette College and an MFA from the School of the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. So please join me in welcoming Maya to the podium.
Thank you so much, Maggie. I want to start this talk with a deep breath. Why? Because we can all breathe, and we're thankful for that. So let's just take a deep collective breath. Thank you. I want to thank Maggie, Marita, and the curators, Horace, originally for contacting me. Originally, I was wondering why me? I'm an abstract artist. What do I have to do with the vision? And I was told that I was perfect for this, and they wanted to see what artists today, how we were impacted, and how we envision freedom. I also want to thank the Eamon Carter staff and the installation crew that helped me out during my installation, which is upstairs. I hope everybody gets a chance to see that. Sasha and Ed Bass, all my family and friends, and my new friends, the other artists that are in this exhibition. I'm excited to be with you. Let's see. So I come from a family of artists. This is my great-grandfather. His name was Alan Randall Freelon. He was born in 1895 and passed away in 1960. And he was a pioneer African-American Impressionist painter and part of the Harlem Renaissance and New Negro movement. he wasn't remembered as much as some of the other famous artists of the time, but he received his MA from UPenn in 1943, and in Philadelphia, that was a major accomplishment. And that's on my dad's side. And my grandmother, she was a beautician. She was actually born in Texarkana, Texas, and I was born in Houston, Texas. So I got some Texas roots. They called her Queen Mother Frances Pierce, and she had a type personality, just like this picture. She was born in 1928, and she was part of the Great Black Migration up to the north to find better jobs and wages and family. Moved her family up there. So she was a beautician. Like I said, she owned a hair shop in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and on the corner of Concord Ave and Fairweather Street, there was actually a plaque named after her and her work in the community. And she was the type of grandmother who never threw things away. Anybody have a grandmother like that? Okay, so she, actually, let me go back to this slide. This slide was taken in Dr. Maya Angelou's garden, and that's an Elizabeth Catlett sculpture. So you can see she's trying to be like the sculpture right there. And that is my namesake godmother, unofficial, but also just a beautiful and amazing friend. They were good friends, Maya Angelou and my grandmother. And so when I was in graduate school and studying art at the museum school in Boston, I lived with her. And she was always encouraging me to make art. I believe she would have been an artist if she had the same opportunities as I did. But she expressed her art as being an elementary school teacher and a hairdresser. And this is me at an art gallery called the Piano Factory in Boston. It was the first time that I ever exhibited tissue paper as artwork and installation. And this was taken in 2006. And that's her behind me, giving me that grandma look. She was proud. So like I said, she was a grandma who didn't throw anything away. And this is a picture of the tissue paper that I use. It's 20 by 30. It's a type of tissue paper called bleeding tissue paper, meaning that when it gets wet, the colors blend together. And I started working with it right after Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast. And I was thinking about water literally moving color, and then the metaphor of watching this happen on paper, and I was finding a way to use it and integrate it into my practice. My grandmother had a rainbow stack of tissue paper, probably from her elementary school teaching days, and it was tucked away in her basement. And there was a beautiful and intricate stain. And I found it under books of old Jet magazines and all this stuff that she had stacked on top of each other. And it must have had a water stain from there was a bathroom above. And it was this happy accident that really intrigued me. And so I started working with it. And when you work with tissue paper, when it's wet, it's pretty fragile. But when it's dry, it's actually pretty strong. And I thought about the summers that I spent with my grandmother as a younger child. She and her sister, her name was Deborah, she taught me how to quilt make. And she taught me how to mend garments and use a needle and thread. And so coming back as an adult and living with my grandmother and seeing them often, she was still doing hair in 2006. I thought about how we can piece things together and how something that seems like a scrap of paper or something that's insignificant could be powerful and strong. And so I started taking the bits of paper as they were falling apart and gluing them back together with just tissue paper and glue stick, just using the elementary school materials that my grandma had available. And this is a picture of my MFA thesis show where I put up all by myself and a ladder. And I covered the entire gallery and did an artist talk in there. And that photo was taken by my dad. My grandmother used to say she was like a rapper before rap happened. She always talked in quotes. She would say things like, "You gotta make a way out of no way," and you need to make something out of nothing. Or we came from a family of sharecroppers that never got their fair share. And so those memories and those quotes that she would always say resonate within my artwork, but also in my heart and how I live my life. So I was really happy to honor her at every step of the way in my creative journey. And so she's also grew up during the Great Depression, and she knows what it is to need and not have. And so she, when she ate, she would eat every grain of rice on the plate. She wouldn't leave anything. In fact, if you were done, she took your plate and took that onto her plate and finished it for you. She didn't believe in waste. And so I created these tissue paper spirals that are actually bits of tissue paper that are even smaller than the quilt-sized pieces that I put together. Some of them are even thumbnail size, and wound them up together into a beautiful sculpture. And I call this historical significance, and it's about bringing folks, Black people, back into history and making their legacy and their stories significant again. And this piece actually was purchased by the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston, and recently I've been using my work in healing spaces and places where art can transform even your energy and your healing process. I've also believe in working in the natural environment, and I believe in celebrating Juneteenth before it was a national holiday. And the great thing about owning your own land is that it's yours, and they're not making any more land, so if you're a landowner or homeowner, that's a good thing. I was thinking about the landscape and outside and being in nature and with animals, Black farmers, and thinking about my grandmother saying, you gotta know your own worth. And that as an artist means a lot. Nobody can tell you, any of the artists out here, anybody, what's your worth. Your value is your own. And that's such a good thing to keep in mind, especially as you move through the world. So the natural landscape, my partner and wife, Jessica Van Hook, she grew up on a farm, and that's part of her legacy. And so moving tissue paper into a natural environment around cows and other things is something that I really enjoy. And a great photographer, young photographer in Durham, Kennedy Carter, took this photo of us on her homestead land. I also traveled to an amazing place called Jordan Lake in North Carolina. Anybody who travels to the Raleigh-Durham area, I tell them to take a stop there. This is an example of a performance piece that I did in the Jordan Lake area when I was asking the universe, what should I do with my artwork next? And that's a tissue quilt that I threw up in the air. This is also in the lake water, kind of giving submission to the water and asking what it wants me to do. And this is a larger view of the lake area. This is an example of an outdoor sculpture. A lot of times I show my work on a clothesline, which is just paying homage to a way that clothes were hung out and shown when you had to wash by hand. And a beautiful thing about tissue paper and kinetic sculpture, which you'll see when you walk through the gallery, is that it dances and plays with you and the air current in the room. And so the wind was doing something today, and it went in this really beautiful spiral that was captured at the North Carolina Museum of Art. And then this is another natural environment where sometimes I just bring my tissue paper out and ask it what it wants to do. And while I'm working with this wet tissue paper, in the idea that we don't waste anything and we recycle, the ink that comes out of the paper when it's wet is just dripping and full of color. And so I use it as a paintbrush to paint almost like a watercolor painting. And this particular work I made on a pottery wheel, so that's how you get that spinning vortex. And it's actually a pretty large piece. This is another example of a work called Spill, and it is a spinning tissue ink monoprint. And what's cool about this work of art is that it was inspired by a local artist to create a version of it on a parking deck garage as a mural. So if you look back at this one, it's a section up in the right-hand side where that blue part is, got blown up and put onto this parking garage. And it's really cool. It's in Raleigh, North Carolina, if you're ever there. I love the intricate nature and the kind of monochromatic colors that come from the tissue ink. I only use this one particular brand, Spectra, which has a limited amount of colors, kind of like your Crayola color box. Like crayons, they're all the same color always. So how do you get uniqueness and texture and pattern and rhythm in a work when you're limited by this color palette? And that's a challenge that I've been working with since I started working with tissue paper. I also create sculptures where I collage together and lay and imprint different works on top of each other. And this is just a 2D work, but there's two sides to it. One is cut in half. And recently, I've been integrating family photographs into my work. The issue with letting a photograph or an image come through is that sometimes it takes away from the abstract nature of the photos. So I really try and find a balance between the figurative aspects and the more abstract. And that is actually my grandmother and her sister, the one who taught me how to quilt make. An old family photograph. If you can look on her shirt, it says cute. So she's been doing selfies and photos for a little minute. I also love working with photographs that are in the public domain or are found in antique shops, especially African-American photos around the turn of the century really inspire me. One, because I like to put them in a new context, but also it's like a collaboration with an artist. I don't know who the photographer is. I don't know who the subject is, but I'm able to kind of speak to them through my monoprint there. This is also a photo of one of my great aunts on my dad's side. So she's related to my great grandfather, Alan, who was the painter. And most recently, I'm into circles. I've been really excited about collaging and bringing more work in, getting more intricate details and layers. So these are two of my most recent works. Maggie talked about the Smithsonian Museum of Art. This was at a really big exhibition where there are thousands of folks coming through, and they basically said, you can do whatever you want, but it's a really big space. So I took these massive quilts and put them in storage space bags that you can vacuum out the air, and created this really gigantic hanging sculpture that was only up for 3 days, and that's one of my biggest works thus far. And that's a picture of me. I think I was done. I was really happy about that. But that gives you the context of the building and where we were. People meditated in there. They came in and we did a group project. And some of the most inspiring aspects of my work are working with community and building collages and making tissue quilts together. There's Jess again, and one of the flag walls that I made at the Contemporary Art Museum in Raleigh. Like I said, I really love working with the community, and I like to use tissue paper as a way for young people to find strength and power, meaning when you connect them to each other, the pieces, you see the strength, you see that it's actually stronger than just you, that individually, it could seem like a scrap or piece of paper or trash even that's discarded. But when it joins together, there's power and strength and unity. And when I work with kids and also folks who are vulnerable or forgotten or have different learning challenges, they really find that joy in making something that is beautiful and fun, and it's just the way that I love to connect with folks. And so I'll leave you on that moment. Am I at 20 minutes shut? Nailed it. I want to give an opportunity for folks to ask questions, and I think that's what we're going to do next. So if anybody has a question, let me know. Don't be shy.
I have a microphone, so well, first off, yes.
Thank you.
All right. Got a few minutes. Oh, good. We got one middle over here. All right. Community effort to pass the mic.
Hi, Maya. Thank you for walking us through your process. I'm curious, learning our process is a little bit of a journey of like where we end up. What were you exploring in terms of materials before you landed on tissue being your medium?
That's a great question. I would say I was a found object sculptor. I started off with ceramics and doing photography and always mixed media. So I always looked for new things to use. But I've been working with tissue paper for over 17 years, and I'm still finding new ways to play with it. And it's just such a rich medium for me. As soon as I'm done with it, I'll probably move on to something else. But I don't know if that's going to happen in this lifetime. There's a question
Coming right around here.
Hi, thank you for speaking today. It sounds like your process is really intuitive, and I'd love to hear more about that. Like, I guess I'm going to leave it open for you, but.
For sure. Let me go back to something like this work. So all I did growing up was art. I loved making art as a young child. I didn't know it could be a job until I saw a Black artist named Beverly McKeever, and that was her job. So being seen is really important, which is why I like to do community events and connect with folks in artist talks and exhibitions. Yes, I spent a lot of time learning how to make art and the composition and the color theory and the balance and the how this is good and that is good and that's bad and this is bad. And I had to do a lot of unlearning when I started working with this. When I was in graduate school, they said it was too beautiful. How can it be too beautiful? And it looked, like hotel art. This is from a graduate professor. A white man, not that it was his fault. He just didn't understand it because he had never seen it. And I thought, okay, I'm going to apply to Skowhegan. And if I get in, I'm going to only bring tissue paper. And if I don't get in, I'll take his advice. Well, you all know what happened. So I got in, I brought only tissue paper, and it's been a wrap ever since. I used the creative technology. I understand all of it, and then just like a jazz musician, I improv. I try something new. Like the stain coming through my grandmother's basement, that was a beautiful accident that I could not have replicated. But it sparked that idea of just being open to not seeing everything as an accident, but as actually meant to happen.
Jeffrey has a question.
Maya, thank you so much for your work and your talk and honoring your family and our ancestors. This work really resonated with me. I think that I want to ask a follow-up question as someone that has done Skowhegan. Mm-hmm. Could you explain to the audience what Skowhegan is and what that experience was like for you, and what did you take from that?
For sure. Skowhegan is a really prestigious art residency in Maine. And it was the most beautiful and intense experience, one of the most beautiful and intense experience I've ever had. Maine is rural, and where it is rural, and it's a lot of bugs and a lot of trees and a lot of swamp. There's something called swamp itch. If you got into the lake, you had to wash it off immediately. And I remember the director, it was Linda Earle. And that was a Black woman who really was focused on making sure that it was diverse and inclusive. And I applied I think 2 people in my graduate school, a bunch of people applied, but only 2 got in. And the experience was transformational in the little bubble that we had. But it's also the first time I got called the N-word when we went to the bowling alley. And so when I say intense, I mean, I felt honored to be in this place, but I also felt out of place and like targeted. And I grew up in North Carolina, so I should have been called that before Maine. Like, it was an out-of-world experience, and I would do it again, just because how much I grew and the community that was formed there was really beautiful. I'm still in touch with a lot of the artists there. And I encourage any young artist to apply to residencies. Free food, free housing, and free space to make your art. So why not? That's how I lived for the first 5 years right out of grad school. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do this residency, I'm gonna do that residency. All they want you to do is make something, so that's easy. And that's really how you grow community and you grow your process and your creativity. So I really enjoyed it. I wanna know what you think. I'm gonna ask that question when you're up here. Yeah, thank you for that.
We have one right back here.
Hello, I don't know if I missed this at the beginning, but did you preserve, frame, encase that first accident from your grandmother's basement? Because it's pretty beautiful itself.
Let me go back a little bit. So there might have been like 50 sheets in it, and it was in like rainbow order. So some of those in that picture are them. And I was just going crazy. I didn't know what I was gonna do with it or I was gonna work with it for the rest of my life. So I'm going crazy. I'm like, make this, make that. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I almost used all the original. But I do have one piece, it's called Katrina, and I actually drew on it a portrait on top of it. And I'm gonna add that, thank you, to my slideshow next time so I can show folks what one of the original ones, but I only have one left. The rest are just either in the spiral or in the quilt somewhere or in some museum or in Madagascar or somewhere, but not with me anymore. Do you have time for one more or 2?
Okay, you're right in the middle.
You might be able to just hear me.
Oh, sure.
So you were talking about the sort of fragility of the tissue paper whenever it's wet and it's like strong when it's dry. And then you had all of these shots of you dragging it around outside.
Yeah.
And I guess it's like more of like a practical question. Like you walk through, it gets wet, it starts to fall apart. Like are you letting this happen? Are you trying to bring it together? Like what are you doing in this situation? How do you traverse?
So that's one of those things where I have to trust the process. And I think a lot of times around art, and which is why you can walk under my sculpture, and I have all those tissue paper sheets in the gallery if you haven't seen it yet. The reason why is because I like people to feel that uncomfortable, what's gonna happen here? Is somebody gonna break it? Or is some kid gonna go, ah? Or, I like that feeling of getting you a little bit riled up. And it also makes you question why you wanna preserve something. Why is it beautiful? Why do you have those feelings? You're told not to touch this. But just like us, we are tiny bits of fragile people, and we have to work together. And yeah, it might be a little wrinkled and ripped up and messed up. I might not be the pristine original piece, but I still fit in somewhere. And I like the idea that even if we're scared of something, or we're scared that it might go, or we're scared that it won't look like that forever, that you could take a risk and see something really beautiful. Now, what happened to the tissue paper is, I don't know. But for that moment and that capture, that's why I love to show this photo. It was being exactly what it needed to be for me and for you. And so I'll end on that note of just remembering that we're all fragile, and remembering that we all need to take care of each other. And give somebody a hug today, please. All right.
Do you want me to put the first slide on? Okay.
So since I've moved here, I've adopted y'all. Y'all, I'm so deeply honored to work with these artists. Thank you, Maya. I think we all know now why you were invited to participate in the show. And I'm thankful that you've entrusted your work to us. And I now have the pleasure of introducing Jeffrey Meris. Jeffrey, never Jeff. Jeffrey is a multidisciplinary artist born in Haiti, whose practice engages with the relationship between materiality and larger cultural and social phenomena. Working across sculpture, installation, performance, and drawing, Jeffrey's work considers ecology, embodiment, and various lived experiences, while healing deeply personal and historical wounds. He earned an AA in Arts and Crafts from the University of the Bahamas in 2012, a BFA in Sculpture from the Tyler School of Art in 2015, and an MFA in Visual Arts from Columbia University in 2019. Prior to the Carter's exhibition, he has exhibited at the Aldrich Museum in Connecticut, Lehman Maupin Gallery in New York, James Cohen Gallery, White Columns, the Luggage Store Gallery in San Francisco, Leipzig, Germany, and the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas, the Aguilar Art Foundation, and Mestre Projects, all in Nassau, Bahamas. He is a Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture alumnus, a Next Haven Studio Fellow in New Haven, and he's currently Artist in Residence at the Studio Museum of Harlem, and he's a deeply heartfelt friend, and I'm eager to hear him talk about his own work today. So welcome to the podium, Jeffrey Meris.
Thank you, Maggie. Before we start, I'd like to just do a quick exercise, if you can. Clap your hand once. If you could, twice. 3 times. Great. I like to start with this image because not only is this a heartthrobber, don't guess how old I am, but it grounds me in a sense of place, location, geography, culture, history, longing, dreaming, and reality. My name is Jeffrey Meris. I was born in Haiti, and I'm from the Bahamas. In the Bahamas, we don't celebrate Juneteenth. Instead, we celebrate Fox Hill Day. Much like the United States and Texas, Fox Hill didn't learn that they were emancipated until almost 2 months after the Emancipation Proclamation. In my practice, I transition between the trauma of the colonial project and my kinetic sculptures to healing and restoring these wounds in my paintings and installations. In Now You See Me, Now You Don't, 7 replicas of my disjointed body each kinetically destroy themselves over perforated sheet metal. These body doubles are the vessels of racial interpolation. They represent my inability to control the way that my body reads in space. Now You See Me, Now You Don't grounds itself in Ralph Ellison's epic novel, Invisible Man, specifically in the employment of white plastic surrogates of my body that nod to Mr. Kimbrough quotes such as, keep America pure. And if it's optic white, it's the right white. So this is a series of sculptures that I made when I was in grad school, just coming outside of grad school. The series is called Now You See Me, Now You Don't. And for all intents and purposes, this work leads a lot of my current studio investigations. I lived in Harlem at the time that I was making these, and I still live in Harlem to this date. But one night I was taking the subway from Harlem 125th Street, and I love this story. I had $5 on my MTA card, and I went to swipe to get onto the subway, and the card read insufficient funds. I swiped again, and it read it read, please swipe again. I swiped again, and it said, please swipe again. And I swiped again, and it said, insufficient funds. And me being the Capricorn that I am, and knowing that I paid, I decided to jump the turnstile. A couple minutes after, the cops came after me. I got a ticket, and the ticket was for $100. And on that ticket, my height was listed as 6'7", and my weight as 250 pounds. And I've never been either of those things. I don't know what the future holds, but for now, I've never been either of those things. And I know this might sound humorous, but I think that inside my work, there's this deep consideration of what it means to appear in the world the way that I do, right? And really thinking about this long history of colonialism and anti-Blackness. I know that these are words that people don't like to call out in the art world. And so I went on to make this work, Now You See Me, Now You Don't. And this work that's currently featured upstairs in the exhibition, The Block is Hot, is an extension. So the work started off as these 7 sculptures where I casted my body into these 7 different moments, and they operate over perforated sheet metal. And this is how they exist in the world. This work is called Tit for Tat. This isn't a part of the Kinetic series, but I really enjoy the way that it feels like it's about the body. It also feels architectural, and also ecological at the same time. This work also comes from no series of works, Now You See Me, Now You Don't. In the interest of time, I'm going to move through the images a little bit quicker. But this work, much like the earlier work that you saw, also grinds itself down on a more horizontal axis. And the title of this work is Heavyweight. I often incorporate found objects inside my sculptures. So it's this assemblage that combines metalworking processes with body casting parts and found objects. The sponge for a long time was kind of an iconic symbol inside my work, being from the Caribbean. It's this thing that's ecological, but it also feels bodily. It feels like a brain or a set of lungs or a heart. It's also porous. For a long time, I was making work that was about immigration and migration and moving and movements. And I really thought about the sponge as being this perfect conduit or this metaphor that could encapsulate all of these ideas. This work is called High Heel. Again, perfect example of how I sort of butcher things and combine them into these sort of laboratory machine sculptures. And this work is called Pied-à-terre. As I mentioned earlier, my mother tongue is Haitian Creole. And in Haitian Creole, Pied-à-terre means feet on the ground. But in French, or sort of this more New York, Parisian lifestyle, pied-à-terre, translate to a second home, something that connotates luxury. And so I was really interested in how language sort of has this interesting slippage where in one language the same thing can mean something completely different. And this was the very first work that I made in the Kinetic series. The cast of the feet and this luggage handle was its own sculpture. And every time that I had studio visits, people would often talk about how that sculpture looked like it's ready to start walking or just move out of my studio. And so that's how I came upon this series of kinetic objects. This work is called Half and Half. I made this work when I was a fellow at Next Haven in New Haven, Connecticut. And this door was being thrown out by the institution because it was this post-industrial factory that had been closed and renovated and turned into an art space. And they were getting rid of this door, and I saw so much beauty in it. And this was in 2020. And the door spoke to me. Often that's how I make my sculptures. I find things and I develop a relationship to them. And I took this door into my studio, and eventually the door said to me, I want to be cut in half. And so I did that. And I realized, hey, wait a second. This looks like that 6'7", 250-pound person, right? And the name of this sculpture is called Half and Half, quite literally because it's half and half, but also because I'm lactose intolerant. Okay, so last joke I'll make, maybe not. If my career as an artist doesn't work out, maybe I should go into comedy. Another thing about the sculpture Half and Half is that I think that it's about two truths and two lies being able to simultaneously exist inside the same ecosystem. So I was thinking about the 6'7", 250-pound person, right? But also thinking about earlier when Maggie was introducing me, I really dislike when people call me Jeff. You have to have a certain relationship in my life to have that kind of access. And the suppliers that I would buy materials, steel predominantly from in Connecticut, had this way of always writing Jeff Meris on my material when I repeatedly told them not to do that. So I think this sculpture is about those two things being extended and also being reduced. I remember being in undergrad, and the Nigerian students always, whenever you met them for Lasha Day or Osagai or whatever their name was, they insisted that you pronounce their name fully and correctly, right? Because to say someone's name is to call them into the universe, right? To speak destiny upon them. And that's the way that I kind of think about my name as well. And these next few images come from my very first solo exhibition that I had with White Columns. And these works were a combination of paintings or things that look like paintings and sculptures. And in the paintings predominantly, my work is very narrative, story, abstract. And in the paintings, those brown paintings that you saw earlier, that's actually old t-shirts that I soaked in acetic acid and used to clean these sculptures that had rusted. So I made those kinetic sculptures, a lot of them while I was in grad school. And I was really, really poor. And I was headed to this la-la land called Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture right after grad school. And so I just found the cheapest storage unit that I could find in the New York area. And I kind of forgot about my work. And I went to pick it up nearly 7 months later when I was about to start Next Haven. And I opened up my storage unit and everything was coated in brown. And so for the first 4 or 5 months of 2020, we all know what happened in March 2020. I spent the first 5 months of 2020 just cleaning rust off of sculptures and not really making any work. But this beautiful transformative moment was happening concurrently to this sort of mass eruption of protests and death and trauma. And I realized in that space and in that time that my practice was shifting. It wasn't just about this racialized violence that I was experiencing, but it was also opening up this space or this conversation to consider what would a Black future look like? What would it look like to heal and to care for these wounds that have hurt me? And so I started making these paintings, and as you could see, these are old T-shirts that in the beginning I used to use stainless steel snaps to adhere them together and stretch them over these welded aluminum frames. Sorry, the name of this one is Shirts versus Skins, and the previous one is First Aid. So in its earlier versions, I was using a lot of medical language because I was thinking a lot about the body, thinking about the skin, thinking about hemoglobin, the relationship between rust and hemoglobin, also thinking about oxidation, being from the Bahamas where everything rusts and oxidizes naturally. And this is one way I started to incorporate printmaking and painterly processes. In the background is the periodic table. Layered on top of that is the scientific formula for hemoglobin. And we come back to this guy that's featured upstairs, The Block is Hot. The title of this work comes from Lil Wayne's 1999 album of the same name. And I'm showing this work because I would show these sculptures and people would always ask me, so what happens to the work when it's done destroying itself? And for a long time, my answer was, I don't know. And I showed this work at Real Artways in Hartford, Connecticut in 2020. And for the first time, something revealed itself to me. I realized that as much as this was a sculpture, it was also a performance. It was also a drawing tool, and it was also a photograph in some ways. And particularly, we're gonna land on the portion that's the drawing tool and the photograph. And so I became very mesmerized by this dust that would fall to the ground from these sculptures. And from there, I started making these drawings. And these drawings are made from the dust that falls from the kinetic sculptures. The sculptures are made out of hydrocal, which is a certain kind of plaster, right? And I think that puts it in relationship of being from the Bahamas, right? Plaster is made from, is chemically very similar, has calcium in it, and calcium and limestone, thinking about the ecological relationships inside the work. And also, this is mounted onto roofing paper. I'm sorry, am I talking too much? And so the hydrocal is mounted onto roofing paper. I'm from the Bahamas, and every year we have catastrophic hurricanes. And after a hurricane, this material is ubiquitous because people's roofs would have been blown away. And so I remember as a child growing up, and this thing, the same way that you think about palm trees and beaches and hotels, for me, this was an image that always stuck in my head, seeing this black paper sort of scattered everywhere. And so it's always been a material that I had a relationship to. And so these are made very sort of automatically. There's a layer of double-sided tape that is adhered to the asphalt roofing paper, and on top of that is the plaster particulates. And in these, I'm thinking a lot about abstraction and thinking a lot about cosmic energy and force, right? Because we're all made of stars, really, right? That's the thing that binds us. Even though race wants to divide us, the reality is we're all the same. And really thinking about this ability to open up the work, right? And this series is called I Used to Be. And I think I'm closing in on it, and things are changing in my studio practice. But the I used to be that comes from Descartes, right? Thinking about French Enlightenment. We're going back to my Haitian roots again. Thinking about the French Enlightenment, right? 17th, 18th century, where France is going through this revolution, where this idea of free will and free thought, fraternité, égalité, and liberté, right? This idea of freedom but freedom for who, right? Because in France, the French people are free, but they're colonizing the Caribbean and the New World, right? And in French, to be, right, this idea of becoming and self-awareness and coming into oneself is really where the title of these works come from. I used to be. And I'm going to transition a little bit. This is also work that I made in 2020, living in New Haven. I lived in a neighborhood that unfortunately had a disproportionate amount of gun violence. And so I would walk the streets and I would find these emptied bullet shells from time to time. And I would collect them. And eventually I used that as an inspiration source to make these ceramic pieces. And around the same time, I also had, I think there's 3 kinds of people in the world during the early days of 2020. There's people who decided to have kids. There's people who got a pet. And there's people like me who became really into plants. And these spider plants, in 2020, I developed this practice called Self-Care Saturday, and a big part of Self-Care Saturday was taking care of plants, and it eventually was just the plants, and this was in my own autonomous home life, and eventually I had so many plants that they started to creep into my studio, and once they started to creep into my studio, they slowly creeped into the sculptures, and so I was really thinking about the bullets, thinking about the plants, but also the summer of 2020, there was a strange amount of fireworks. And it felt as if the country was on fire. And I was reading Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents and Darnell Moore's No Ashes in the Fire. So I was thinking about fire a lot. And so I combined these 3 symbols, the plants, the bullets, and the fireworks. And that's what became Catch a Stick of Fire. And the title of this work comes from a mentor of mine that died when I was in my early 20s, and he would always speak in parables, and Catch a Stick of Fire was one of those. And this is Catch a Stick of Fire 2. This is on view at Socrates Sculpture Park in Astoria, Queens, in New York. And see him thinking about the same things, but the one thing that changed inside the sculpture was that I started working with these coral bell plants. And through my research, I realized that coral bells actually predates, how do I put this? Coral bell plants predates 1776, if you know what I mean. And so they show up in a lot of indigenous rituals and religious customs. And so that was my way of honoring the original people of this land. And this is Catch a Stick of Fire 3. In this work, there was this clip of DMX that floated the internet after he died. And it showed this really intimate, tender scene of DMX, this person that you feel me. It shows this really intimate scene of, someone that we know to be this iconic symbol of Black masculinity, right? We have all these ideas around what a Black man looks and acts and functions like in the society, but here was a scene of this Black man being tender and being vulnerable. And so in some ways I'm thinking about that as being this honoring moment to him. And this work is much different than the kinetic sculptures, right? Because those sculptures are very intense and very hard, whereas this requires a certain softness and a certain sense of care. These plants have to be watered once a week. And these are some paintings that I've recently been working on. These paintings also are grounded in the sense of care. The blue tint that you see actually comes from copper. The brown that you saw earlier comes from iron. When iron oxidizes, we call that rust, and it produces this brown hue, right? Essentially, all metals have a rusting point. So when copper rusts, right, if you think about the Statue of Liberty, that iconic green, it's actually a copper. If it was to be cleaned, it would look like a shiny, bronzy sort of color. So I force copper to rust on purpose using acetic acid, and I use these T-shirts that I got from the Bahamas, and these T-shirts sort of exotify or tropicalize what it means to be from that space. And this is essentially the back of those T-shirts that you're seeing. I use this sort of quilting, stitching method to flip it on its head and sort of take it outside of this touristic gaze. But I realized after I made this one that I'm not really that interested in that. And this is another one from these series. I think they work just as well as these abstractions on their own. They don't have to be loaded with this super political, tropical narrative because again, I'm just not really interested in that. And this is my current studio at the Studio Museum in Harlem. I'm really sorry, but you're gonna look at this gorgeous black man. I wish that you could have just seen the sculpture, but I don't have an image of it. So that's me with my work at my open studios in Harlem a month ago. And in closing, I want to read this short passage. In Haitian Creole, my mother tongue, there's a saying that goes, "En pile main fait travail léger," which translates to, "Many hands make light work." Thank you, Maggie Adler, Marita Poole, Horace Bullard, Madeline Fitzgerald, the many staff at the Eamon Carter Museum, Ed and Sasha Bass, my family at the Studio Museum in Harlem, my studio assistants, and many fabricators. Thank you.
All right, question time. Anybody have any questions for Jeffrey? Great.
It's not a question. It's really more so of a statement. I just really appreciated when you were speaking of your name and how you like to be called Jeffrey, because my name is Nyquasia, and oftentimes,
Come on.
oftentimes people misconstrue it, and so when I introduce myself, I like to say my name fully and completely. That way, when it's pronounced back to me, you know how to say it. So I just appreciate you for that, because I tell my daughters often, because they have eclectic names as well, but I tell them often that when people pronounce your name, make sure that they're pronouncing it correctly, because as you said, they're speaking you into the universe and into their universe, and you want it to be in the correct manner. So thank you for that.
You know what I think is kind of interesting? The fact that I would say, "Hey Siri, call Nyquasia," and Siri would be like, "You want me to call Nyquasia?" Right? But then if I say, "Hey Siri, call Ivan Jidanov," she has no issue pronouncing the Jdanov, right? Or the fact that we all know how to pronounce Pasolini or Polanski. All these, those names aren't, you know what I'm saying?
To make a call, first
We-
turn off
oh.
airplane mode.
Yes, Harry James. Have you ever commissioned any work to signify or talk about the struggle the people in Haiti are having?
I don't think that I've particularly made work that is one-to-one about that, but I do think that me showing up and me being here right now and me saying the word Haiti, and this is me honoring my ancestors and honoring my legacy.
Not a question, but a statement. I just want to circle back to your earlier statement about being both extended and reduced at the same time, and amplify that, because that resonated in so many ways. I'm learning this new appreciation, like starting to gain an appreciation for art that I've never had, but the way you are speaking into like so many elements of life, not just art, but that moment right there was just very special. And I want to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
We're all talking about the same thing. You have an uncanny sense of self-confidence that projects. So at what point in life, even on that early photograph, I could see it there. At what point in life did you become you and was comfortable with you?
Oh, wow. 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 Is it okay if I call you Auntie? Auntie, you just took me to church. Although it might seem like that, most of my life I struggled with being an other, right? I'm like this black queer immigrant from the Bahamas. And I grew up really poor. Sorry, I shouldn't say poor. I grew up very financially challenged. No, seriously. Because although we didn't have a lot of money, I think that I grew up in a community that was filled with love and that looked out for one another. That's not poverty to me, you know. I also don't want to glamorize what it means to grow up in the hood. I'll be real. But I think that it was, I think that this is a continuous journey of finding myself and finding my place in the world. But the moment that things really pivoted for me was, I would say, in my mid to late 20s. I started realizing that I don't need to be validated by any single institution or person, right? I'm going to show up in the world the way I want, and you're going to accept it as it is. My auntie has one more question after you.
Thank you for that, and thank you so much for your talk. I don't recall the exact name of the residency, but could you share your experience when you were in Maine? It was mentioned earlier. I'd like to just hear, if you would share that with us. Thank you.
Yeah, so I did Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in 2019, right after I finished my MFA at Columbia University. And I said it that exact way because there's a reason. So when I went to Skowhegan, anyone that's ever been to art school or grad school knows how stressful that is. So I started Skowhegan, and all I could do is talk about Columbia. And I became synonymous with the Columbia guy. I was the only student from Columbia University that year that was accepted to Skowhegan. And there was 65 of us. And grad school will do it to you, right? Because there's the race part of it, right? Where you're in this institution that's teaching you all of this information and knowledge and culture that you're not really reflected in, right? And then on top of that, like when I was at Columbia, Columbia was $64,000 a year. It's now $75,000 a year. I don't have a lot of money, right? And not to mention that it's in New York City where every space is expensive. And so it really didn't feel like you got your bang for your buck at the time. And so my first few weeks of Skowhegan, I was grieving hard. And then I think it's a 9-week program, and somewhere I realized, like, wait a second, you have to be present and you have to show up. These people, and the crazy thing is, everyone comes with their own sense of grief at Skowhegan, but we're not really talking about that. But it's a safe space, so you can talk about that. And then once you realize, like, oh, you have these same feelings of grief and isolation that I have, you're worried about your career, you're worried about the outside world and race and all these things. How about we talk about this and hold each other? And that was very transformative for me. Some of the people that I met at Skowhegan are some of my closest friends to date. You know, they put you on, they show up for you. You're feeling sad, you just text someone, and, you know, it's that that kind of a community.
Jeffrey, I want to add to that. Did you remember the stars?
Yes.
I've never
It was
seen so many
crazy.
stars.
It was like staring up at a James Webb telescope image.
So whatever your problem was, you just looked up and you're like, oh,
Thank you
it's
for
not
that.
that deep.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that, and I saw my first lunar moth there, that green, giant, bat-looking
Those
moth.
things are gross. First off. No, because they literally only live to hook up and reproduce and die.
Right. So I feel you. I went right after grad school, too, actually in the middle of it. And just being in nature and feeling the community and being isolated, I think that was super healing. And you lived in like a camp. It was like going to camp. The dorms, there were several people in the
Yeah,
room.
and you eat all the same meals together. Everyone goes to the studio at the same time. You know, you party together. Like, there wasn't really,
There's nothing else to do.
yeah.
But yeah, thanks for sharing that, because I forgot how much I did grieve and let go there, and then gain the confidence to be who I want to be
Yeah.
after.
Again, that was around my mid-20s. Yeah.
Got one back here. Let me come to you.
You trying to buy something? I don't. Let's see. When was my first commercial show? My first commercial show, and this is why residencies are important, going back to Maya's point, right? Because I've basically been doing residencies since I finished grad school, right? I finished in 2019. I'm at the Studio Museum now, and this likely will be my last residency for a very long time because I don't have to do them anymore. I can afford to have my own studio. But I think that I was making work. I would say like 2 years after grad school. I had my first show at White Columns, and the show did well critically, but I didn't sell anything. And that's okay, you know, because that's a part of the practice. You know, you gotta have some receipts before people trust the work that you're making. See me after the talk.
Hi. I had a question about, and this might just be because I'm a emotional person. Do you have an emotional response to the "now you see me, now you don't" each time you present it? Or does it look different to you each time you see it? I'm curious about the range of emotions you have.
Yeah. So I think that's why I had to shift towards other works. I think that for a long time I just was living with this grief and trauma, but then I had to realize that that's not mine to hold. You know, because I'm not the perpetrator of that violence, right? I'm holding a mirror up to this world and to this society. So now it's okay. And to me, this story needs to be told. You know, as hard as it is to live with, you know, someone has to see it. And I hope the right people are seeing it. I'll take one more question just in the interest of being respectful to the other presenters.
Oh, there's one right over here. I'm coming. Well, then the recording of today's lecture will record your question. So here you go.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a statement also that your work made my spirit jump, and it's bold, and it's it's awakening, but also it's poetic.
Thank you.
And so, thank you.
Thank you all.
All right. Yep.
Am I on?
Yep.
Okay, that sounds better.
Are we on?
Are you on, Letitia?
Am I on? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Am I on? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm a woo-woo emotional person too, as you might surmise, and sometimes you just have to go with serendipity. So Margaret Brown was not an artist invited to exhibit her work in Emancipation, but I received a phone call. Well, first, Letitia said, I'm going to include this work about the Clotilda in the exhibition, and have you read Barracoon, and you need to see this documentary. And I said, okay, I'm on it. And I've watched the documentary now 5 times, 6 last night, I think, at the Modern, and there's such a spiritual convergence between Letitia's work in the show and everything we're trying to do here and Margaret's work that I'm just really delighted that you two can be united for the first time. You two who have lifted up the stories of the people of Africatown in Alabama and made them the glowing aspects of your work. So I'm going to give an introduction to both of you, but I'm just so pleased to bring you together as a connector at the Carter. I just wanted to mention something about Jeffrey's work before I do this. It is not currently kinetic. We had some issues. And again, as an emotional woo-woo person, I think it's resisted being ground down here at the Amen Carter. So you can still get a sense of how it's supposed to operate, but it has stopped grinding. And I think that's awesome. Okay, so Letitia Huckaby should be known to all of you as one of Fort Worth's legends. She has a degree in journalism from, She has a degree in journalism from the University of Oklahoma, a BFA in photography from the Art Institute of Boston, now the art school at Lesley University.
Yes.
And her master's degree from the University of North Texas in Denton. Huckaby has exhibited as an emerging artist at Phillips, New York, the Tyler Museum of Art, the Studio School of Harlem, Renaissance Fine Art in Harlem, the McKenna Museum in New Orleans, and the Texas Biennial at Blue Star Contemporary Art Museum. Her work is included in several prestigious collections, the Library of Congress, the McNay Art Museum, go visit it, the Art Museum of Southeast Texas, the Brandywine Workshop in Philadelphia, and the Samela Lewis Contemporary Art Collection at Scripps College in Claremont, California. And she was Texas Artist of the Year in 2022.
Wow.
Yeah. We previously collaborated for the first time during MAP 2020, Making Art with a Purpose, with the further we roll, the more we gain at the Carter. Huckaby was a fall 2020 Art Pace Artist in Residence and was represented by Tally Dunn here today in Dallas, where her current exhibition, Bitter Water Sweet, is intricately tied to the subject of today's conversation. She is the co-founder with Cedric of Kinfolk House, a collaborative project space that inhabits a 100-year-old historic home, Big Mama's house, where community and art converge in the predominantly Black and Latinx neighborhood of Poly in Fort Worth, Texas. Please make it a priority to visit Kinfolk House. Thank you, Letitia. Margaret Brown's documentary work examines the American South, from her iconic film on Towns Van Zandt, Fort Worth's Towns Van Zandt, Be Here to Love Me, to the story of the BP oil spill's lasting impact, The Great Invisible, which won the Grand Jury Prize at South by Southwest in 2014. Her film, The Order of Myths, which examined Brown's native Mobile, Alabama, and its still segregated Mardi Gras celebration, won numerous awards, including a Peabody and the Truer Than Fiction Independent Spirit Award. And her most recent film, Descendant, which is on Netflix, watch it, won the U.S. Documentary Special Jury Award for Creative Vision at Sundance and was acquired by the Obama's Higher Ground Productions. There are a lot more awards for Descendant. Should I go through them? Including the NAACP awards. So the film explores the story of the only known slave ship that's ever been discovered in North American soil or water, the specter of its crimes, both past and present, and the steadfast resilience of Africatown's descendants in the face of a century of denied history. So thank you for being here, Margaret. So I want to start by asking both of you the same question. How did this project begin for you, Margaret, and then Letitia?
Well, I am from Mobile, and I made this film called Order of Myths like 16 years ago. I don't know if anyone here saw Descendant last night, because
You want to, maybe a show of hands would be helpful, just so
maybe
we know.
it's okay.
Okay.
So there's some folks. There's a family. Okay, so in the Order of Myths, it's about segregated Mardi Gras in Mobile, and there's a black celebration and a white celebration, a black queen and a white queen. And the queen in 2007, when I was filming, was from the Mayer family, which is the family that brought the last slave ship to the United States. And so I didn't know how important that fact would be in the film until after Mardi Gras was over, and we were filming with Stephanie Lucas, who was the black Mardi Gras queen. And I already knew that the Mayer family, my mother had said that the Mayer family brought the last slave ship to the U.S. on a bet. And so I knew this, but it wasn't like taught in school. I didn't learn this like going to public high school in Alabama. And
sorry,
what?
I just laughed.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
No,
yeah.
No, it wasn't something we focused on. And so, but then I was at Stephanie's grandparents' house, and her grandfather kind of casually mentioned that he is a descendant of the Clotilda. And I looked at the cinematographer, and he looked at me, and the whole film just sort of shifted underneath us. We knew that the film had to be about the connection of these two queens. And so that's sort of how I first encountered the story, not from growing up in this place, but from this film I made and the serendipity of these two queens being related over a bet that happened 161 years ago. Wow. So, yeah, that's how the story came to me. And then in 2018, I think, 27, maybe early 2018, there was an announcement the Clotilda was found, except it wasn't the Clotilda. The community ended up calling it the No-Tilda because it was the wrong ship. And so, but that's when I started filming, because I think it's the same as what you found. The story is really it's about the ship, and the ship adds a lot, but it's really about the people that have been carrying the story for 161 years. And that's really hard to look away from. So I actually did not think they would find the ship when I started filming, because I remember James Delgado saying, "Oh, there's only one place left to look." Mm-hmm. So, but I knew the community was so powerful. This community of storytellers was so powerful that I knew there was a film anyway.
Letitia.
So I think the project for me started because I've been working with Freedmen's Towns. I've been documenting around the Deep South and into the Dust Bowl, Freedmen's Towns, and I was interested in this one, but more from a landscape perspective. Like, I've been obsessed with the lack of African American land wealth, and thinking about these towns that Black people tried to build, and what's left. What does that look like now? You know. And so I was interested in Africatown because of that, following the landscape and thinking about the water because of the ship. And so I really wanted to do this project that looked at the Black presence in the landscape with the connection to the water. And I found, just doing research, a group of divers that were studying the ship. So I tracked them down, sent them this long email, my name is this, and I'm going to be Texas Artist of the Year for 2022, and I've been doing this work, here's some images. And I impressed him, and he shot the email up to James Delgado, who you just mentioned, and who is a vice president of Search, which is based in DC. And James is a marine archaeologist that worked on like the Titanic. He worked on ships in Pearl Harbor. So he's done some really major projects. So to get a call from him, I took that very seriously. And while we were talking, I'm telling him all about what I want to do. And he's like, well, I think you need to talk to the people. And just like she said, it started out as this one thing, but if you don't include the people in it, you don't have the whole story. So he put me in touch with the Descendants, and that's how it started for me.
What were the different types of relationships you formed with the people that you photographed, what was the range of reaction to your presence in the community, to your documentation of their lives and of their stories? Either one of you.
I was pleasantly surprised because with some of the other communities that I've gone through and photographed, there's been so much generational trauma that even though I look like them and have the same history as them, they feel victimized in a way. So even within this exhibition, there's two bodies upstairs. One is with Tulsa, right? Focuses on Tulsa, and the other one deals with Africatown. In Tulsa, I ran into a lot of generational trauma. And so even though I went into that project wanting to photograph the people, I pulled back on that one because I didn't want to contribute to that feeling of, the media was coming in at that time. It was the centennial since the massacre, and they felt like people were coming in just to tell their story and weren't really giving anything back or leaving anything. So for that project, I shifted gears, and we may talk about that later, I don't know, but I made it more of a self-portrait. But when I went to Africatown, and this community was started by Africans who were enslaved approximately 5 years before emancipation. So they still held a lot of their beliefs, their culture, their knowledge, and you get that sense from the Descendants, and they are much more open about their story. Their story is every African American story. So when I went there, I felt more like family than somebody just trying to tell their story.
Yeah, this is a story that's been, the master storytellers have passed down for generations. And you feel that, like it's hard to miss. Because I remember I've made this is my fourth feature, I think. And, it's documentary filmmaking is casting. And I just couldn't believe when I started talking to people how they were such good storytellers. They were mesmerizing. And that was also became part of how we filmed them, because it was just when you've been sort of holding on to this story that sometimes it's been a secret because it's a story that could get you killed,
right?
For 160 years, and it gets passed down, you get really good at telling the story. And there's a lot of pride in that story. Even though there's fear, there's also pride.
Yeah.
And I feel like they probably, and also I think, a lot, there's been so much interest. They're used to people like us now coming in and talking.
For sure.
Yeah.
I know you, Margaret, were interested in connecting with the mayors as part of the film, ultimately to no avail.
Yeah.
Were you, Letitia?
I didn't try. No, I wasn't interested.
I figured that was going to be a short answer. Yeah.
Right.
Do you want to tell a little bit about sort of your efforts to include them or not?
So Helen Mayer is one of the stars of Order of Myths, this film I made 16 years ago. It went to Sundance. She traveled all over the world with the film, talking about literally how her family brought this slave ship to school children in Ireland, And so, when this happened, when they found the no tilde, everyone wants to talk to the mayors. And I thought at the time when I said, well, I actually have this in, I know this family, and and she talked to me. She traveled, she went to Sundance with the movie. Like,
Oh, wow.
she's used to talking about this. Surely they'll talk to me, you know, and I'm from there. Like, I'm not like someone like parachuting in, you know, from another place and leaving. I'm like of the place, you know. And so I thought they would talk to me. But I think when something is about reparations and this sort of, it was, they wouldn't talk to me. She would, I remember like I would write Helen on Facebook, and we're both runners, and I would be like, we would talk about running, but anytime I brought up the Clotilda, she would just act like I hadn't asked. You know, it would be like this thing you couldn't talk about. So, you know, the film came out on Netflix and in theaters, and 2 days later, the Mayer family made a statement on the Today Show as part of this special. So they finally made a statement, but it had to like be on Netflix first. So.
Wow. Why did you choose the series that you did for this exhibition, Letitia?
Thinking about emancipation, you know, this goes back to something I was just talking about and the differences in the reactions I got with these two different communities, and looking at the generational trauma that's still left and all the challenges that they're facing in Africatown. To me, that's a perfect picture of what emancipation means in this country, because it's a document of what the lives of the individuals are. You know, in Oklahoma, where Greenwood is, the Greenwood district, there were so many freedmen's towns in Oklahoma that it almost became a freedmen's state. And if you go there now and visit where all those different towns were, there's maybe a graveyard, maybe it's on somebody else's property now, you know. And with the ones that are left that have any amount of community left there, almost all of them that I've gone to that has a community there has a highway running through the middle of it and has a lot of big industry on the outskirts of it, which you cover so well in your documentary. But I think that's the picture. And so I wanted to show those two sides, a community that's still fighting and has their autonomy and is so well, can articulate their story and push that. And then this other one that they're like a block and they're tired.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about Greenwood, Mississippi and your connection to it?
So the project upstairs is called A Tale of Two Greenwoods. And my father was an Army officer, and his last duty station was in Oklahoma. I went to high school at Lawton Senior High. And then, as she mentioned, I went to the University of Oklahoma for my first degree. I, too, did not learn in history about the Tulsa Race Massacre. I learned all about Boomer Sooners.
Oh, my goodness.
Right? And how to make the West, how they built the Great West. I learned all about that, but I did not learn about the Greenwood District and the Tulsa Massacre. So when I went and I ran into this pain, I kind of stepped back and I was researching, and I found that the name Greenwood came because a lot of the original, the founding members of the district migrated from Greenwood, Mississippi. My father was born and raised in Greenwood, Mississippi. And that's where we would go to visit my grandmother and his side of the family. So I knew Greenwood very well. And if you've ever been to Greenwood, the tension there is probably palatable to what it was in Oklahoma during the massacre. So to think that these individuals moved from one Greenwood in Mississippi in the Delta to build a life and had made a wonderful community, and what happened to it, that's heart-wrenching in itself. So the piece upstairs is diptychs, and one side has an image from Tulsa and one side has an image from Mississippi. So I photographed a city block just outside of the Greenwood district of stairs that lead to nowhere, where houses should be. as a kind of poetic representation of what happened in Oklahoma. And then on the other side is the city block where my father grew up. It's a house that I didn't visit because by the time I was born, they had moved into a brick house. But I took my mother with me when I went to go photograph this block, and she was able to say, this is exactly the house where, you know, when they were in college, she would come to visit and all that kind of stuff. So it's two city blocks, one from each Greenwood, and then along with the pieces from Mississippi, there are images that I was born in Augsburg, Germany, and my dad would send back some of those old Polaroid land photographs to his mom because she wasn't able to see her first grandchild, and he would write on the back, and so I superimposed his handwriting on the front and printed those out. So some of those are included with the Greenwood side.
Thank you. Can you both talk about how or if your relationship continues with the people of Africatown?
Yeah, I mean, I'm from Mobile, and Africatown is part of Mobile, so, and there's a lot of, Africatown is a super activist community, and I guess I work with this studio called Participant Media, who we made the film with, and Participant is sort of known for having like two parts of the company. There's one part that makes the movie and puts it out in the world, and there's another part that just does social impact. And so I knew, because I've worked with them on two other projects, that if I made this film, they would put money toward the social impact and like what the community needed and listen. And so there was like a listening tour where Obama's company, Higher Ground, and Netflix and Participant, before the film came out on Netflix, they all came to the community to just have a listening of like what the community wanted. And I mean, obviously there's not just one voice of what Africatown wants. It's a community, and there's many different ideas of what does repair look like? What does justice mean? What does reparations mean? So to like witness that conversation. And so the conversation obviously is still continuing, but so yeah, like I'm part of that conversation. I'm part of watching people who, you know, some people who've been leaders and activists in the community for years and are part of a generational activism in the community, but then other people, I've kind of watched them grow into becoming leaders, which has been a really powerful thing to witness. So yeah, I'm tied to it in that way.
One of the things that I had agreed to do when I was there was to come back at some point and teach, do like a workshop with the kids.
Amazing.
So that's something that's still on the table. But I just found out today that Joycelyn, my contact for that project, is apparently traveling with the film.
Oh, yeah.
So we haven't nailed down all those details yet, but that's what I'm hoping to be able to get back and do something.
I don't know if you can answer this question, but what do you expect the future of the ship and its contents to be? And do you think the sort of more troublesome aspects of how the community feels that it might be absorbed and exploited is the future for the community?
Well, yeah, it's a super loaded question because obviously, like, you look at like what Brian Stevenson has done with the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, and how like the city did not really help him do that, and the money all came from other parts of the world, and then it was like a runaway success, like how much it made, you know, how much money this museum and sort of art installation made. And so I think one thing the film covers is like, you know, they find the Clotilda, and you see like you see the city trying to figure out like, well, are we going to be able to monetize this? Because we just, you know, Montgomery just missed out, you know? But then that's the question of, well, like, does the community own its narrative, you know? And myself as a white person, like when I started the film, I thought, oh, well, the mayors are going to talk to me. So I have some ownership of this story because I can do something that no one else can do, but then I couldn't get them to talk to me. So then like halfway through, I'm like, I kind of was like, probably not going to talk to me. I made the film over 4.5 years, and, you know, so it's like really the question in Africatown is like, who gets to tell the story? And I went ahead and made the film, but it was it was not something I would have done if I had known what the film was when I started. Like, I don't think I would have felt I was the right director. And so, but a documentary, one of the things I like about documentary, one of the things that make it complicated is that the only reason I would make a documentary is because I don't know the answer to the question I'm asking, which is what makes me want to make the film to begin with. Like, I really enjoy the adrenaline of work where you wake up every day and you have no idea what's going to happen, and you have to make these split decisions with where to point the camera, how to respond to someone. And I really like that. Like, I can't believe I get to, like, that's my work, you know? So I was already so into the film, I kept going, but I do think that the question in Africatown is like, does the community get to have ownership of the story and the money that comes from that?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And should the city have, like, so that is what's happening right now. And if any of y'all want to get involved, descendantfilm.com, people show up in the community a lot. And, you know, and it's, I think there's a lot that, you know, there's still not street lamps, like, at night in the community. There's not sidewalks, like, and this is like a historic, arguably the most historic neighborhood in the state of Alabama. And so it's a place of pride, and it's sort of a place of like incredible, like what could be, but it's not there yet. So, and the city is not going to help, you know, in some ways they are, but in other ways, the mayor of Mobile, like owns a lot of land in Africatown. And it's industrial land. It's not land that's for historic preservation. So there's a lot of battles going on quietly, I would say.
Did he react to his portrayal in the film?
He, well, okay. So
Where's my tea?
So
lots of shade. No tea, lots of shade.
Yeah. So in the film, there's a community called Lewis's Quarters, and it's Joyce Lynn's family land, and it's surrounded on three sides by a lumber yard that historically has been owned by the mayor of Mobile, who is a white Republican, but now it's a publicly traded multinational. The family sold it, but his family is still on the board of this company. And like 3 weeks before the film came out, they decided they were going to relocate. So kind of in response to a film dropping on Netflix worldwide might be people might notice they're doing that then. Yeah, but they haven't really moved out yet. They announced the move, and they announced where the site was, but it's like a 2-year thing. So I think that was one response. Mm-hmm. And then we had a screening in Mobile in this like 2,300 person theater, and he came to that, but I don't think he hung out for the Q&A.
Yeah. Letitia, have people communicated with you about what they think the future is going to be?
Yeah, and she talked about a lot of the issues that the descendants have, whether they'll maintain ownership of their community and also the ship. If the ship is able to be raised and, let's say, put into a museum, they want that museum to be put in Africatown and not the city. Take it and build this, which happened in Oklahoma.
Yep.
But we're not talking about Oklahoma right now. We're talking about Africa. Yeah. Let me focus. And then some of them also, at least one of the descendants said to me, she doesn't want the ship raised. Mm-hmm. She would prefer it stay where it is as a sort of historical marker, memorial in the place where they tried to destroy it, Yeah. And I could see that too. I can see both sides. There are a lot of descendants who want it raised and want a museum and want all that comes with that. Like she said, they don't have street lights. They don't have a gas station. They don't have a store. They don't have hotel. It's a neighborhood.
Yeah.
And it's a neighborhood surrounded by
industry.
Yeah.
Can I say something else to that? Because I think there's another sort of nuance to that as well, which is like, there's like historic Africatown, and then part of Africatown is just industry. So there's like, and I don't think hardly any of the residents want it in like historic Africatown. Those are homes, and that's like the community garden.
Yeah.
If there's going to be a museum, I think people want it like replace some of the industry. Like, don't put it where the houses are, where people are looking at you like you're like fish in a
exhibit.
goldfish bowl.
Right,
you
right.
know?
Yeah.
Because right now there's like tour buses going through like the
I didn't see
community.
the tour bus.
Yeah, and like, and I don't think those are tour buses from the community. It's like other people.
Yeah.
Do you have questions for each other?
I started picking her brain a little bit this morning about the film, and if you haven't seen it, please watch this film. But one of the things that was really moving to me with the film was she had these very poetic moments. Like there's a scene in the cemetery where Cujo Lewis's headstone just glows, and then there's a scene with Joycelyn in D.C. at the African American Museum, and she's in the space that's supposed to be the cleansing room, and there's like the water coming down, and it's supposed to be for you to kind of sit and process everything you've just seen as you've gone through the museum, and it's just striking. And then the film has a lot of documentary, and I heard you now just say that you really was drawn by their storytelling and wanted to include that as in the film. And I was asking her if that's her normal way of working, but we didn't finish that conversation. So what do you consider your normal way? Is it this more poetic style, or is it the straight like documentary approach?
Well, I mean, I think like, because this is not my story to tell, like I had to make sure that like I had the sign off of the community. So I showed scenes to people in the film before the film was done, because I just wanted to make sure, and not to everybody, to be clear. Like I didn't like have like rough cut screenings for 2,500 people, but like there were a few people who were prominently featured in the film where I was like, because for some of the more poetic scenes, not the like verite, like reportage, I'm just there with a camera filming an event. I didn't ask for anyone's.
Right.
But for the things that are more like my artistic license as a director, like I just wanted to make sure I was like getting it right. And I've never done that. Like usually I would never show subjects something before it's completed, because things are so fragile. Like I wouldn't want, I don't know, it would probably like throw me off or something. But this was like, well, it's their story.
Yeah.
Like, what if I get it wrong? That would be crazy. So I felt like so that was a different thing. But I don't know if I have a particular style. I think really firmly that a work of art like tells you what it wants to be. And I felt like it was telling me that this was more of a collaboration than something that like it was my story. So I had to make it more inclusive.
Is that also true of your photographs?
Yeah, I love that response, because that's totally how I felt going through the experience. And I didn't see her film until after my work was done, and I was really blown away at the kind of similar
earrings,
poetic liberty paired with documentary style to sort of tell this story.
Yeah.
And I went there and just lived for a little over a week, and just kind of found my way through it, like tried to feel my way through this story, and interacting with the people in the space and just exploring. Yeah.
No, it's amazing the ways that our work, like, it was like almost like, it was almost like the place was telling, because like the fact that they speak to each other so much, it's like the place is telling its story, and we're just like there to like record it.
Yeah. And there's a scene in the film where some of the men are in like a backyard and they're talking, and one of them says, and I'm going to mess up the quote, I'm sure, but one of them says, the ancestors are counting on us.
Yeah.
They're expecting us to do a certain thing, right? And that's what I've kind of felt like when I was looking at the work, like maybe he's right. Maybe the ancestors were telling us something. I didn't know I was listening to the ancestors, but apparently they're singing the same song.
Yeah, well, and I definitely remember when we shot that film that day, it was a very powerful moment to witness, where I felt that.
Yeah.
So.
He like punctuated it.
Yeah.
Like, no. You hear what I'm saying? Yeah.
We open it up to the audience for questions? Yeah, thank you. One over here, Madeline.
Great. Who was it over here? Thank you.
I just missed the beginning, but what was the name of of this film?
It's called Descendant.
Descendant, and
Like-
it's on Netflix?
It is, yes.
Okay.
That one is called The Order of Myths. Yeah, Mardi Gras Queens.
All right.
Thank you all for this. It was really beautiful seeing the film last night. I'm really happy I didn't miss it. I'm curious about, since you're from Alabama, I'm curious about what the reaction to the film was from not just the people of Africatown, but the people from your community.
I think it's really nuanced, the reaction from the community, because I think the sort of white power structure there is sort of waiting for all of the energy from the film to go away so they can just keep industrializing the land around Africatown. But that has not happened. And so I think that, and I also think, it's really hard to say, because I think what gets to me is filtered, right? But there was a ton of press coverage there, and I think I thought this was strange because it's not what happened for Order of Myths, where people, white people in the city, I felt did not like me, and someone tried to beat up my dad, and it was pretty rough. But with this film, I feel like there was a sense of pride for this community that's part of Mobile, that has this story where they're still being, they're still being aggressed upon. The story is powerful, and I think people were proud that was part of some, and I guess I'm talking about the white and the black community in Mobile. There was a sense of pride that this is our story, which I wasn't expecting. I thought it would be more like Order of Myths. It is. Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Margaret.
Hi.
I'm Misha from Kenkofa, Jordan.
I thought I recognized y'all. I was I know you. And you didn't say, and you look, okay, I got it now.
So we are the founders of Kenkofa, and we work with descendant communities all over the U.S., specifically helping Black folks uncover their ancestry. And we had the honor of working with participant and Margaret's team in Higher Ground on developing DescendantFilm.com and supporting.
Yeah, they did the website, which is so great.
Oh, thank you.
We also happen to live in Tulsa right now, and are very familiar with the story of Greenwood Rising, the Africatown Heritage Center that they're building, and your work. And so I wanted to ask y'all, and something that we're thinking about, what do y'all think is the role of art, whether it's film or photography or any kind of art, and reparations, but also preservation and making sure the stories of Black folks and our history of this world continues on for generations?
I think that I consider myself a storyteller, and I'm drawn to the stories that are hard to tell.
Yes.
But I try to present them in a way where we can all discuss without it turning into somebody trying to beat up your father.
Yeah.
I try to present it in a way that I've often described as a quiet punch. That hopefully I can draw the viewer in by the way I make the piece, and then we can deal with what it's talking about. And I think that's a powerful thing about art, is that it opens the door to being able to have these conversations. And the more we can talk about it, the more that information can get out. All of you will never forget about Africatown after today. Probably most of you will have seen the film, and you're going to tell somebody else about it. And so then that information gets out. They were holding this story for 160 years that they couldn't tell it. They just couldn't tell it. You keep quiet about this, or something will happen to you or your loved ones. And now they're telling it, and it's spreading like wildfire. And I think that's key for any amount of change to happen. Whether that turns into reparations or what direction that goes, I don't know. But if there's ever a case for reparations, there's so much evidence in this particular one. That's why the mayors have learned to be very quiet.
I think film is an empathy machine. I think if you, or art really, I think you look at something and you can see yourself in it maybe in a way that you can't if you're just like reading, if you're like hearing, I don't know. I just think, I mean, the reason I think I want to make movies is I want to, and will go to movies and go see art, is I want to put myself inside of something that's unfamiliar. And so, like, I guess, I don't know. I mean, I think it's a really long conversation, but I guess I would just say that.
I just want to jump back to Skowhegan for 1 second. I got a really great quote from a visiting artist that was there, and he said the best documentation is to be unforgettable. And so you just touched on that, and I think that striking work, like you said, quiet punch, you don't even know you're learning. I think of my art as like a sweet, succulent flower that pulls you in, and then you read the title, and you're like, whoa. But my dad was the architect of record for the National Museum of African American Art and Culture.
Wow.
And so I didn't really talk about my parents, but I remember him saying, should we put a slave ship in here? Should we enter in the space and like, you know, it's like a family conversation. Like, how do we deal with something so heavy? And I love the approach that they took. If you haven't been there yet, I know you'll go in this lifetime. When Black people make the institution that you're entering, it's very much more thoughtful than if someone else is teaching it or showing you. And so the contemplative court is what you were talking about, the rain down of this really beautiful renewal and water. It's like a waterfall, and you sit there and you sit and you feel cleansed. After going through this really narrow, wood, dark, kind of dungeony space and hearing these stories, you get chills. And so I thought about what I would want the ship to stay down or come up. And I just love being able to think about having an option or an opportunity when many people didn't.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, this is what I mean by fate and serendipity about, I feel the presence of everybody's ancestors. So thank you for sharing that, Maya.
We have a question in the back here.
Hi, my name, what matters is we've got these artists here, and I'm learning that artists help us heal. As you talk, I was trying to be quiet and listen, but I'm reminded the last time I came here, it was a conversation about a African American Cultural Museum here in Fort Worth. There's a Juneteenth Museum here in Fort Worth. There's a Racial Healing Museum here in Fort Worth. And I hope that you artists come back and be a part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, we have time for a couple more questions. I see your hand over here. I'm coming.
I just wanted to say, I believe that the film was screened at the Modern last night.
Yes.
Night, yeah.
And the text of this exhibition here today and the content of this program, I'm so grateful that we have museums that will encourage and host these discussions and these expressions at a time when it's being suppressed.
Yes.
In schools, as though it hadn't been suppressed before. But I thank all of you, and I'm grateful to the museums.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, let's give our speakers one more round of applause. I just want to say thank you all for coming this afternoon, and thank you specifically to Maya, Jeffrey, Letitia, Margaret, Maggie. Thank you all so much for your excellent presentations and your thought-provoking conversations. I want to invite you all to explore the exhibition upstairs on our second floor, which again is open until July 9th. So if you're not able to process all of it today, you can come back for a few more weeks. And as a reminder, the exhibition catalog is available for purchase. If you'd like to learn more from these three artists that spoke today, they have interviews in the catalog. And our artist and Maggie will also sign books in the atrium for a few minutes. So if you're interested, you can participate in that as well. Thank you so much.